They left the house one morning and vanished into a tangle of timelines, tips and searches. Volunteers are back in the field, detectives are still sifting thousands of videos, and the question everyone asks remains the same. Where are Lily and Jack? Hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you get first-hand updates as investigators and volunteer teams press on. A volunteer group calling itself Please Bring Me Home has announced it will join independent searches to shake the tree and try to surface new leads in the hunt for 6-year-old Lily and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan. That development changes the shape of the search in two ways. It increases the number of people actively looking on the ground, and it raises the chances that something missed by previous sweeps will be found. Volunteer teams often bring energy, local knowledge, and an ability to mobilize quickly in places where formal search operations can be slowed by process and paperwork. They walk lines, check hollows, and revisit areas where official searches may have been brief or deprioritized. In missing persons work, volunteers can and do produce critical breakthroughs. A dashcam clip handed in by an alerted neighbor, a footprint noticed at the edge of a trail, or a small item of clothing spotted beneath brush. At the same time, independent searches create practical and ethical challenges. Coordinating volunteers so that they don't unintentionally contaminate a scene is a complex task. If volunteers walk through an area before forensic teams can properly document it, they can alter or destroy evidence that might have helped piece together a timeline. That's why experienced volunteer groups usually operate in cooperation with police. They follow controlled search patterns, keep detailed logs, and communicate findings through official channels. Please Bring Me Home has said its intent is to be methodical, to retrace possible routes, to focus on waterways and trails, and to revisit spots where items like the pink blanket fragment were found. Their slogan, to shake the tree, signals a mindset. Look in places investigators have rechecked, probe hard-to-access hollows, and persist until someone finds something that changes the picture. Whether that persistence pays off is unknowable, but more eyes on the ground do increase the probability that a missed clue will surface, provided volunteers coordinate with the RCMP and respect scene preservation protocols. Global News covered the volunteer involvement and conducted a brief interview with organizers, bringing broader attention to the group's plan. Having mainstream media report on volunteer efforts has two important effects. First, it raises awareness and can attract additional vetted volunteers who bring specialized skills. For example, former search and rescue members, handlers experienced with search dogs, or people skilled in grid search techniques. Second, media attention places the independent search under public scrutiny, which can encourage better organization and accountability from the volunteer leaders. The interview emphasized that the volunteers planned to operate with documentation and careful logging to avoid the pitfalls of earlier, chaotic sweeps. That pledge is vital because it reassures investigators and the public that volunteers aim to help rather than unintentionally complicate forensic work. News coverage also amplifies the call for any local residents who remember seeing something in the relevant window to come forward. In many cases, a casual observer who was initially convinced their sighting was unimportant will feel emboldened to share a dashcam clip or a recollection when reminded by coverage. The downside, though, is that more media mentions also risk amplifying rumors. When volunteer searches become headline fodder, influencers and self-styled sleuths can latch on and magnify unverified claims. That means professional media and volunteer organizers need to emphasize accuracy and discourage the kind of click-driven speculation that produces false leads. Court records and unredacted documents available to investigators suggest the children were last seen that morning at roughly 8 a.m., but the family timeline contains discrepancies between about 8 a.m. and 9:40 a.m., an interval now central to reconstruction efforts. That gap matters because the first 72 hours after a disappearance are the most critical for preserving perishable evidence and confirming witness accounts. When documentary anchors exist, a phone ping, a security camera frame, a bank purchase, they provide firm points investigators can use to tie human recollection to objective facts. Unredacted material indicating an 8 a.m. sighting gives investigators a possible starting point, but inconsistencies between family accounts create uncertainty about the actions and whereabouts of people who were in the household that morning. For instance, who was responsible for the children's supervision at particular times? which rooms were occupied, which doors were open or locked, and whether any vehicles left or arrived. Those are the kinds of operational details that reconstruct a day. Memory under stress is fallible. Different people will recall events in different orders, conflate sequences, or fill gaps with assumptions. Investigators therefore test verbal accounts against phone metadata, CCTV, and any physical traces recovered. The unredacted court notes are a reminder that initial public summaries rarely capture the nuance investigators must parse behind closed doors. A stated, last seen, time becomes a pivot around which phone activity, childcare routines, and visitor logs are examined. Resolving the discrepancy between the 8 a.m. suggestion and other reported times is not merely academic. Narrowing that window could change which search areas are prioritized and which footage gets re-examined frame by frame. Disagreements in the family's timeline between roughly 8 a.m. and 9:40 a.m. complicate the construction of a coherent chain of events. In missing persons investigations, minute-level differences matter. If one witness says a child was last seen leaving the back door at 8:10 and another testifies the child was inside playing at 9:20, those statements imply different custody and movement patterns which investigators must reconcile. Investigators take a multi-pronged approach. They re-interview family members separately, compare statements against objective markers like the Dollarama footage or school bus logs, and pull device metadata, GPS, Wi-Fi associations, and call/text timestamps that place people and phones in specific locations. Why family timelines diverge can have benign explanations: stress-induced memory lapses, overlapping responsibilities that blur perception, or miscommunication in the household routine. But the divergence could also indicate intentional misdirection. If so, investigators will look for corroborating digital or forensic evidence. The reason authorities treat these discrepancies seriously is simple. Accurate timelines allow police to map probable movement corridors, determine who had opportunity to influence evidence, and identify witnesses who might have seen critical activity. It's a forensic version of detective work. Timelines narrow possibilities, guide search parameters, and help prioritize which tips merit immediate action. Meanwhile, the RCMP report they are following up on more than 860 tips and handling over 860 video files, while also running forensic testing on items recovered. The numerical scale is a blunt measure of both public interest and investigative workload. Every tip must be logged, triaged, and assessed for immediate credibility. Investigators will prioritize items that can be corroborated by time-stamped footage, GPS, or transaction data. Those are the tips that can rapidly be checked and either enriched into leads or discounted. Video files, in particular, require painstaking review. Doorbell cameras, dashcams, business surveillance, and private mobile video can provide unbiased records of movement, but thousands of hours of footage must be searched, often frame by frame. Police typically use a blend of human review and software tools to flag relevant images, but even assisted review is time-consuming. Forensic testing on physical items, the pink blanket fragment, for example, moves in parallel. Lab work might include DNA screening, fiber analysis, and testing for trace materials that could link an item to a vehicle, location, or person. These technical processes take time and must follow chain of custody protocols. Rushing them risks contamination or results that cannot be used in court. The RCMP's public updates emphasize both the volume of data they are processing and the priority given to corroborated tips, a signal they cannot chase every rumor with equal vigor, but will test anything with verifiable anchors. Specialized resources have been deployed. Human remains detection dogs from British Columbia searched roughly a 40-kilometer area on and around the Lansdowne property. That search was exhaustive in the sense of distance. 40 kilometers of grid and trail coverage is massive in rural terrain, and it reflects investigators' willingness to use interprovincial assets to exhaust investigative avenues. Canine teams are a key capability for locating buried or concealed remains, but their effectiveness is influenced by environment, weather, and time since the disappearance. The dog's involvement underscores both the seriousness of the inquiry and its forensic complexity. Ground searches at this scale require mapping lanes, logging GPS tracks to ensure no duplication, and rotating handlers and dogs to maintain effectiveness. That operation, costly in personnel and logistics, is also a statement to the public and the family. Nothing is being left untried. Volunteers plan to complement those efforts, and the Please Bring Me Home group has indicated they will consider waterways and other hard-to-access hollows in their November plans, places that are sometimes overlooked or difficult to revisit in the first sweep of polished search grids. Volunteer organizers have publicly discussed a possible November waterway search, indicating a shift in focus to ponds, creeks, and drainage systems that feed into larger bodies. Waterways are a classic search priority for missing person cases. Small items often move with currents, evidence gets deposited near banks, and human activity associated with drowning or concealment sometimes leaves trace materials downstream. Even when ponds were checked earlier in the investigation, volunteers argue that water conditions, low visibility, and seasonal changes mean another pass is warranted. They intend to employ divers, sonar where accessible, and boots-on-the-bank searches for items that divers or cadaver dogs might miss from above. Water searches are complicated and risky. Currents, hidden debris, and variable depths require safety divers and coordination with marine specialists. That's why volunteers typically coordinate with police or professional search and rescue units before plunging into a body of water. If done properly, a waterway sweep can either reaffirm earlier findings or provide new evidence that had been missed. Some presenters and volunteer organizers argue the children could have wandered miles toward school within a 2-hour window, underscoring the urgency of canvassing routes between home and likely destinations. A child moving at a steady walking pace can cover surprising distances in 2 hours, and in rural areas canals, pipeline corridors, and backcountry trails create direct lines that can be faster than neighborhood roads. The argument for widening search radii is practical. Patterns from other cases show that missing children are sometimes found several kilometers from home, often along routes that are logical to a child following familiar paths or attempting to reach known locations like a school or a neighbor's house. That's why volunteers and some investigators advocate retracing the most probable movement corridors from the Dollarama sighting and the family's known routines. Mapping those corridors requires GPS overlays, witness interviews, and careful cross-referencing with the times the children were last confirmed on footage. The volunteer position, that investigators should not assume a short-range vanishing, is a reminder that geography can create deceptive assumptions about where to search. Social media has been a double-edged sword in this investigation. A statement widely circulated and attributed to the mother was posted to social platforms, but the RCMP has publicly stated they could not verify its authenticity. The circulation of that message demonstrates how quickly unverified content can shape public perception. When a statement purports to come from a family member, people accept and share it, and those shares can set expectation and narrative in ways investigators cannot immediately correct. That's one reason authorities urge caution about amplifying material that has not been authenticated. It can misdirect witnesses, generate false leads, or create legal complications. Dispatch audio and the family's call records, including a call logged at 8:28 a.m., are among the objective artifacts investigators use to anchor the timeline amidst conflicting accounts. Those records are not always immediately released to the public to protect investigative integrity and privacy, but they are the kinds of materials that police compare with witness statements and volunteer findings to reconcile the critical early interval. What follows from all this? There are clear takeaways. Independent volunteers add crucial capacity and can surface new tips, but they must coordinate tightly with authorities to avoid contaminating evidence. Timeline inconsistencies between 8 a.m. and 9:40 a.m. remain a central analytical problem that shapes where searches and digital retrieval efforts concentrate. The RCMP remains the lead investigative authority, and independent searches are auxiliary, useful, potentially revealing, but not a substitute for coordinated forensic work. Waterways are rightly a continuing priority. Even if ponds were checked previously, seasonal changes and missed spots justify new, well-planned sweeps. And finally, public tips, especially timestamp video, preserved messages and photographs, remain the most actionable resource the public can provide. Hanging on to footage and turning it into investigators is far more helpful than amplifying speculation online. This is a difficult, ongoing search that balances urgency against the procedural care required to preserve evidence and build a case that will stand up in court. For volunteers, careful logging, scene respect, and clear communication with the RCMP will make their efforts most useful. For the public, the best contribution is concrete, saved footage, preserved messages, and direct tips to investigators, rather than conjecture. And for the family, the community, and everyone watching, the hope is simple and persistent, that continued effort from professionals and volunteers together will surface the one verifiable fact that changes everything. Hold space for Lily and Jack, and hold pressure on the process to be thorough and accountable. We will keep following verified developments and report them clearly, calmly, and with respect for the hard work that real answers require.